In a Pullman coach in 1944, a captured German stared through the glass and watched his worldview shatter mile by mile. He was Reinhold Pabel, a sergeant of the Wehrmacht, seated not on a splintered floor in a drafty boxcar, but on a cushioned seat with armrests and curtains. A porter, a black American in a crisp uniform, moved quietly down the aisle with coffee and sandwiches and a single word delivered with dignity: "Please." The gesture was small yet disarming, but the true fracture did not come on a tray. It came through the window as the train rolled west and did not stop. Outside, factories roared, rail yards teemed with locomotives, rows of brand new trucks stretched to a horizon the prisoners could not see. Towns slid past with lit storefronts, full shelves, children on bicycles, and cars on every road. For soldiers who had fought in Ukraine and at the Volturno, who knew the rubble and craters of a continent at war, this view had no precedent. It was not the picture they had been taught. For years, Nazi doctrine had described America with two words: naivete and arrogance. Hitler had called it a mongrel nation, soft and divided, unfit for a sustained war. State newspapers, newsreels, and speeches had repeated the verdict. The soldiers believed it, as one believes the ground is solid. Then the train windows showed them the ground was something else entirely. Before these men could look upon a single factory, they had to lose a campaign they once believed they would win. On May 13, 1943, west of Tunis, 275,000 German and Italian troops laid down their weapons. Veterans of the Africa Corps stood in the dust with their hands up. They were not broken. They were furious. In their minds, Berlin had failed them, supplies had dwindled, fuel ran out. After the chaos at Kasserine Pass, the Americans had returned with more of everything: more tanks, more aircraft, more artillery. There was no evacuation fleet. There was no Dunkirk. There was only surrender and a long wait for ships. In that wait, something else revealed the scope of American planning. Transports that had ferried soldiers and equipment to war returned across the Atlantic with empty holds. The War Department saw an answer: fill the ships with prisoners. Month after month, tens of thousands crossed in hammocks below deck and argued about what awaited them. Some officers insisted the United States would hide its scars, steering around bombed cities. German news reports had spoken of Luftwaffe raids on the American coast. Then a convoy passed into New York Harbor in June of 1943. The men came on deck and faced a skyline that stood entire. Bridges, docks, cranes, all in motion. Smoke lifted from factories. The Statue of Liberty shone. Not a single tower was missing. Not a single window broken. The arguments fell silent. A fine crack formed in the story the men had carried. It would widen with every mile. Processed at port camps, deloused and photographed, they boarded trains and began the 4-day journey across a continent that needed no walls. Mexico and Canada were enemies of the Reich. There was no neutral frontier to flee toward. There were only thousands of miles of land and language that none could cross without a car, English, and American money. At a stop in West Virginia, the guards brought lunch aboard: white bread, butter, meat, apples, chocolate, bottles of Coca-Cola. One prisoner would write that a single train lunch was better than anything he had eaten in 2 years of service. Yet the food was symptom, not cause. The cause was the absence of war. Drugstores open, churches painted white, gas stations with queues of cars, laundry drying behind homes with unbroken windows. The panorama did not fit the Europe these men had left. Britain carried the scars of years of bombing. North Africa was strewn with burned iron. The Soviet Union was a graveyard. German cities themselves had begun to burn. Then the land opened, and the scale of American farming altered the count. Fields vast beyond European memory moved beneath machines: tractors, combines, harvesters. In Germany, most farms still depended on hands and horses. These soldiers had turned soil. They knew what a harvest cost in backs and hours. Here, 3 men in a combine did the work of 30. If food looked easy, then so did the trucks and the factories and the trains queuing to carry more than any nation in history had ever moved. A guard gestured casually toward a sprawling plant and said it was not even one of the big ones. The big ones were elsewhere. He was not boasting, he was making conversation. That, more than bravado, unsettled the men. Arithmetic began to settle in. If this was the ordinary middle, what chance had they ever had? Arrival brought another discovery. The camps, from Kansas to Texas to Nebraska and Arizona, obeyed Geneva. 3 meals a day, hot showers, beds with mattresses, medical care, libraries, canteens stocked with script for cigarettes and sweets. The prisoners were sent to work that did not directly feed the American military. They harvested wheat in Kansas, picked asparagus in Wisconsin, stacked hay in Nebraska, rolled cigarettes in North Carolina. Work turned observation into understanding. A mechanic or a farmhand did not need a lecture to know what a row of tractors meant. Then came the numbers in print. American authorities allowed access to newspapers in English. Washington wanted letters to go home uncensored. Each letter would be a message no leaflet could match. In 1944, the figures landed. 96,359 military aircraft in a single year, 16,000 of them heavy bombers. In 1940, 331 American tanks had rolled out of factories. In 1943, the total was 29,497. This was not a simple mobilization. It was a civilization changing its mind about what to build. Hardliners still tried to deny it. Newspapers could be propaganda. The sky could not. Over Kansas and Texas and Oklahoma, formations of aircraft droned day after day. Contrails stacked in lines that any mechanic could count. The letters home multiplied. Thin paper, Red Cross envelopes. A wife in Hamburg read that her husband ate meat, gained weight, and played soccer, while her city lay in ashes and her ration card held 800 calories. The message traveled without a slogan. Your husband lives. Your enemy has enough to be generous. Inside the wire, another struggle unfolded. Nazi loyalists policed barracks, ran clandestine courts, and beat men who wavered. The War Department needed a different trajectory, but was bound by law. The Geneva Convention forbade indoctrination. A loophole appeared in Article 17, provide intellectual diversions. In October of 1944, 85 carefully chosen anti-Nazi prisoners were moved to a camp in upstate New York, then to Fort Kearny in Rhode Island. Editors, professors, linguists, they were told to publish a newspaper in German for every camp in the country. Make it smart, make it honest, price it at 5 cents so no one could call it free propaganda. They called it Der Ruf, the call. The first issue appeared on March 1, 1945. It sold out. Circulation rose to 75,000. Some read in secret, others burned copies. In March, a review of 80 underground camp newsletters found that most still carried pro-Nazi content. Yet the factory, as the project was known, had begun. Then the war ended. With surrender came a reckoning no headline could prepare them for. Every prisoner watched film from Dachau and Auschwitz. Ovens, pits, the walking dead. Knochenfilme, they called them. Bone films. Silence followed. Men struggled to believe what they had seen their own state create. A quiet diarist in Oklahoma, Helmut Horner, wrote that he and his comrades had known dissenters were locked up. They had not known about the gassing and the extermination of Jews. He added 7 words that carry across decades. I am ashamed to my bones to be a human being. The exit arrived with numbers again. As repatriation began, the Provost Marshal General polled more than 22,000 departing prisoners. 74% left with a favorable view of democracy and a friendly attitude toward their former captors. A handful of writers from Fort Kearny returned to Germany and kept publishing. Alfred Andersch and Hans Werner Richter helped found Group 47, the circle that shaped the moral conscience of West Germany for 2 decades. One editor would write that if he had been free to read the banned books in youth, his entry into life and war would have been different. He was not marveling at factories, he was mourning a stolen education. Not all who learned wished to leave. In September of 1945, Reinhold Pabel slipped beneath barbed wire in Illinois and walked away. He studied an article on how fugitives were caught and turned its advice into an escape. He blended in, learned to flatten his accent, and made his way to Chicago. He called himself Phil Brick. He sold books, paid taxes, and fell in love. Years later, the FBI walked into his shop. The courts weighed his case. An American officer who had known him in Italy spoke for the man he had become. The court allowed him to stay. He became a citizen of the nation he had first glimpsed through the glass. Thousands followed in time. Former prisoners returned as immigrants, studied medicine, built businesses, and revisited the farms where they had once lifted hay under guard. Across the Atlantic, the writers who had sharpened their pens in a Rhode Island camp worked to rebuild a literature from ashes. In the end, this is not a tale of industry alone. It is about what men write when the world outside a window contradicts everything they were taught to believe. They had been told America was weak. They rode through its strength. They had been told it was decadent. They ate its bread and worked its fields. They had been told its people were mongrels. A porter handed them coffee and said please. And when the letters and journals were finally set down, the refrain was not envy or even admiration, it was loss. As Helmut Horner wrote in May of 1945, while the mill wheel clattered in Oklahoma, 3 German soldiers felt that they had lost not the war, but the world. That world had been an illusion. The proof was not a pamphlet. It was a continent seen from a moving train, ordinary and impossible and real.